Why are the chairs here? Well, because it's time for the panel, and I'd like to welcome our panelists to the stage. Get started. We have Dipti Borkar. You are Vice President and General Manager at Microsoft. You're responsible for SaaS application development and Azure Databricks, definitely analytics-related things, and you've got a deep background in this with your involvement in Presto and Ahana and all those things. So welcome to the panel.
Thank you. Great to be here.
Absolutely. And we have at the end Kapil, VP Engineering LinkedIn. We may have some Pinot stories to tell. And
absolutely. Over some Pinot, hopefully.
Over some Pinot. Well, it's a little early. I'd take a cup of coffee, but I don't know. I mean, we make the rules here, right? So we can do what we want, but we didn't arrange that. So let's not ask for that. I understand Kishore also. You were Kishore's boss at that time. So anytime during the panel you got any stories, those are fine.
He did look familiar, yeah.
Yeah, right. It's like I think I know you. Sachin Joshi, you are with Cisco Webex, and a senior director there leading Webex SaaS and data platform. Again, some fairly obvious real-time analytics things going on there. And Sudhir, director of engineering at DoorDash. Now, meal delivery is kind of a marquee use case for real-time analytics for reasons that might be obvious, might not. We'll make them obvious by the time this panel is over. But how fast can I get my burger and fries is sometimes a pressing existential problem, and real-time analytics technology makes that, gives us that answer. So, all right, now, three of you are people involved in implementation of real-time analytics technologies, development of infrastructure. One of you is basically a cloud provider that provides these things. So we're going to have some slightly different, and I like this mix of people. I think this is a good mix of perspectives on the issue. Our goal here, by the way, is really, obviously, to hear from the expertise of these folks who have been there ahead of us. And I'm really assuming most of us in this room are building our first system, right? We're trying to figure out what the way is, and I want everybody to come away with a better idea how to proceed from these perspectives. So I'm going to start with the non-cloud people first. Dipti, I'm going to come to you after. And this will be really the only question that I really want each of the three of you to answer, which is, and we can just come from far end towards me, what was the driver for you in your individual businesses? Why did you start going down this path of real-time analytics? Tell, briefly kind of that story. And everybody, for your first answer, also just give your name and company. I already did, but everybody, you only heard them once. We don't have, floating call-outs above everybody. So if you would, just say who you are, your company. How did you get started in real-time analytics?
Sounds good. Thanks, Tim. Great to be here. Again, as a quick intro, my name is Kapil Surlakar. I lead the data and AI platforms at LinkedIn, and have been at LinkedIn for a while, built a bunch of infrastructure and systems and technology. So to answer that question of how we started on this journey of real-time analytics, maybe we can take a step back and go, because I think the roots really lie in the needs of the product as it evolved. And just to kind of take the trip down the history lane, memory lane, so to speak, if you've been a long-time LinkedIn user, you probably remember, like, if you used it a decade ago, it was largely a static site, right? Or felt very static, where you upload your resume, quote unquote, and you wait. Or if you're active, you go and look for jobs. But when the product started down the road of getting more engagement, right? When LinkedIn had feed, and when the website became active, I think that's when a lot of the product needs became apparent, as in, hey, you have a lot of people interacting with the site, that's driving advertising, and the product experiences started dictating the needs of real time maybe weren't obvious, But you think about what the product needs. Like, okay, you have a bunch of people checking out your profile. That was who viewed my profile. I think that's been widely talked about. Very popular feature. You want to see who is been checking out your profile, right? As you've been engaging with the platform. If you're an advertiser on the platform, you want to see how your campaigns are going, and you need it, fairly soon. You don't want to see, long after your campaign's been sort of failing. So the first attempt at doing things like this, you try to make whatever you have work, right? So in hindsight, as unlikely as it sounds, I think the first attempts were in kind of like a traditional data warehouse, right? I think we either had Oracle Data Warehouse or Teradata at the time, maybe in transitions. But you try to make it work, and then you realize, one, it's like, yeah, there's just no way you're going to run that level of QPS on the thing. And the latencies are just going to be crazy. That's not something that you can show to your users. Internally, I think it's fine. So the first attempt at building a system after literally having tried everything else was to say, hey, we got this search index technology. Let's try to play with it and see if you can, kind of make it work. And search was something that LinkedIn had, and it is real time. It has to be low latency. It can, suck in fairly recent, fresh data. So it kind of works. And that was, I think, the first success, if I would call it, as saying, oh, I can actually show you, some things real time in terms of putting together these numbers. But we quickly realized that the amount of hardware and the footprint that you need tends to be excessive because search is not built for this, right? So at a point when I forget whether it was who my profile or the other use case, but we had like, I think 1,000 nodes trying to run this particular use case. And you look at it and go, this is nuts. This is not going to scale. It
was a valuable use case, but maybe not that valuable.
Exactly, right? But it was a good proof point in terms of, hey, like this product fit and need is real, but the value is not going to allow you to spend thousands and thousands of servers. So this is where I think we had the team with the Kishore leading it at the time said, hey, we need this product need obviously works, but let's take a step back and see how we can think about it differently and see if, like an entirely different system would work. And before that, of course, there is real product pressures in terms of, hey, do you really need this, right? Do you need really real time? Mm-hmm. Can you do it with a batch system, right? Do you need it at a second level or within minutes? What about if we compute, every half an hour, every hour, and we kind of load this?
This is kind of before that's obvious. Like Gwen was saying, internal users want it, but they don't need it. Now we understand external users don't, but this is 7, 8 years ago. It wasn't yet clear.
Exactly. In hindsight, it all looks ridiculous, right? But when you are in the moment, you're kind of trying to find every other option that doesn't involve you building something totally new.
Yeah.
And that's where we really started. And I think once Pinot got built, the value of it was obvious. Now again, this is very early stages of Pinot and so on. But I think we could replace sort of all of that with like a handful of nodes, right? And the value and the ROI was clear. And from there on, we just had an explosion of use cases, because once you see that, hey, this is something that enables you to dream up new products, I think the trajectory completely changes, right? This wasn't about saying, hey, you got a bunch of analytics going on. How can you make it go faster, right? This is about completely reimagining the product experience, saying, hey, what can you do today that you just weren't able to do with existing technology?
Yeah, those different concurrency, latency, and freshness characteristics aren't just faster or better, they're different, and now we've got a new era. And it'd be interesting at some point, not now, but to dig into, because this who viewed my profile feature figures heavily in the history at LinkedIn. Is there a single brilliant product manager that needs to give their history of how, or was it just an idea at the right time, kind of the great PM or the zeitgeist theory of LinkedIn history? It would be interesting to dig into that. So thank you. Now, Sachin.
Yeah. Hi, I'm Sachin Joshi. I'm Senior Director at Webex. I'm responsible for the SaaS platform and also the data platform at Webex. Our movement to real-time analytics was actually driven during the pandemic. And, and it's incredible in terms of what we see, the platforms like Microsoft Teams, Zoom, Webex, Slack. We were all remote during this time, and these platforms were able to support us during this overall pandemic. Just to give an overall idea about Webex, at Webex we have at any point of time 300K meetings going on. There are almost 2 million participants joining at any point of time. And they are submitting a lot of data to our Kafka servers at the back end. And there's a huge data that is being submitted. And before pandemic, I'll take a little bit of journey how we come here. Before pandemic, we used to generate reports and dashboards, and it was every time, every day we used to update. Administrators were fairly happy with it. It was like, we are good, the engagement data is fine, the reports are fine. But when pandemic hit and everybody got remote, not only the IT administrators, but the HR managers, the business leaders wanted to know what's happening about the engagement of the employees, what features they are using, what kind of engagement they are having with the meetings. So there were a lot of requests which were like, I want to know what happened during my town hall meeting. And this was not good to give the information, yesterday's information. You wanted more and more recent information. What happened in the town hall meeting just we had right now. So that was the first driver for it. Second driver for it was also the end users wanted to know how much they are spending time during the day, and what time they are spending in terms of work-life balance, what is the focus time they're having, and that has to be recent. I mean, imagine you are giving data to the user and you are showing something which is yesterday's information about what meetings he had. It is not going to be helpful.
Yeah.
So those were the external, and internal. Essentially, we were also looking at since all of these meetings needed to be troubleshooted live. Our internal tech support team, the support team was also needing this information real time so that they can debug the information real time. So those were the multiple drivers to start looking at real-time analytics database. And we actually moved from a more traditional batch system towards Flink jobs, and we created a lot of Flink jobs during this time. We created, for all aggregates, we were creating significant Flink jobs. And then we started feeling that this is not going to go further, because a lot of dimensions and the queries that we are not getting satisfied. We have to continuously change our Flink jobs. So that's the next evolution where we started looking at the real-time analytic databases.
I'm mentally sticking a pin in that note. That's interesting. Dimensionality and I don't want to say agility, that's an overused word, but it's just sort of overall inertia in the system and how quick. So we'll see if we can come back to that. That would be, that's great. But pandemic, so I wonder if the meal delivery gentleman has any pandemic thoughts, or otherwise
pandemic
just...
has been good for some folks and not so good for others.
Yes.
Well, thank you, Tim, for the invite. Honored to be here. Nice to see you all. Although I can't actually see you all.
Right. There's like vague outlines of
yeah,
faces.
I can see some faces. Too much coffee in me this morning, so I would actually welcome some Pinot if anyone's got it. I'm Sudhir Tonse. I currently lead the data platform organization at DoorDash. And I come by way of a few years prior at Uber and a few prior to that at Netflix. So I guess if you want to hitch a ride today back home, settle down on your couch, watch some movies, I can recommend some really good apps for you. Now, if you want to Netflix and chill after that, I could recommend apps to you, but I wasn't involved in any of those, right? But anyway, yeah, so the pandemic, it's been good. In terms of real-time data and challenges, again, back at Netflix when we started this around 2012, the focus was really all on operational understanding of real-time data. As in, that was the first time most of the industry, I guess led by Netflix at the time, was moving into the world of microservices. So literally thousands of microservices moving into the cloud, AWS, and streaming movies. All pivotal changes done at the same time in the company, right? So there was immense need for actual real-time observability data. So that was my first foray. At Uber, again, it's a logistics marketplace, sort of an organization, so there's absolutely real needs for some real-time analytics. For example, there are regulatory concerns when Ubers or Lyfts go to airports. Las Vegas airport is an example. So you have to give real-time notification to the authorities as Ubers enter and as Ubers leave. Same thing with events. If there are large events like Coachella, et cetera, you need real-time data to understand the supply and demand situation there. So coming to DoorDash, it's the millennial crowd. All of these on-demand services are, dime a dozen now. There's a lot of on-demand services. What's more important is folks want it now, ASAP, right? So that essentially translates to real-time needs. So that's what we're focusing on. That's what my journey has been.
All right. Dipti, so you, again, I'll let you tell your story, but just to tee this up, you've got a deep background in what I call the query federation space. So key part of the contemporary data stack, not classically a real-time thing, but now here you are as a cloud provider seeing that and the other tools for which there is demand. So with that perspective, how have you seen the market evolving over the past decade in analytics, in your experience and broadly in terms of in Azure?
Yeah. Well, if you want me to summarize a decade, will take more than the rest of the session.
I understand. The top level points.
We got all time.
I know.
The arc.
But honestly, being in data, I've been in data for the last 20 years. I live up to my initials, DB, if you haven't noticed.
I did not, in fact, and I am now disappointed with myself that I didn't see that. You're qualified, yes.
And a lot has changed. There hasn't been a dull day in data over this past period of time. Hi everyone, great to be here. Dipti Borkar and Tim kind of introduced me as already responsible for some of the SaaS experiences on Azure, as well as a few other parts of the portfolio. And I've been, in various parts from operational databases, non-relational, NoSQL databases, disaggregated stacks, and Ahana and Presto as well, and now in Azure. In terms of the last 10 years, I would say that there's a few kind of key parts of these milestones, if you will, that we've seen. I was thinking about the MapReduce paper that Google published. It was 2004. It's been nearly 20 years.
Oh my goodness.
And that kind of started this disaggregation of storage and compute, which was led to, as we know, the data lakes, data lake houses, whatever you call them. And that started off the big transition from a more traditional stack to a much more modern stack that led to a lot of data. Data is endless. There's a lot more storage. It's never going to end. And that was one big part of it. The second big change, I would say, is, and some of my co-panels here kind of saw this through the pandemic, is the need for moving from a batch-oriented or nightly jobs, nightly updates to real-time updates. And we've seen, as I've talked with customers over these last 10 years, and particularly over the last 5, everyone's kind of moving from nightly Hadoop jobs, where if they were in that mode, to near real time, if not absolute real time, and that really drives the value of data as from a business perspective, right? And being on the side of the vendor side, if you will, and the cloud hyperscaler side, right? We build these products at the end of the day for people to generate value out of their data. And then third, I would say, is SaaSification, right? We're just seeing the beginnings of it. There's obviously a lot of SaaS applications out there, but increasingly, data platform teams want to spend less time on managing their own backends and operations and let the systems take care of those things for them. And And that's one that has started off and will continue over the next several years.
All right. I share that sense that SaaSification is just getting started. It seems like a weird thing to say because, well, what isn't SaaS? But it doesn't feel like that transition has really done all the disrupting that it's going to do. And we've got thoughts like, well, SaaS actually means now all the data is in one place and there's new value we can extract from it and offer it to users. That's still a new idea, so we're not done.
Absolutely,
yeah,
a lot of innovation to be done there.
A great insight. Now, Dipti, just another question for you. In our conversations prior to this panel, I heard you say that every cloud has to have a real-time analytics offering. Obviously, I love that statement, but expound. What do you mean? Why? Pretend I was a skeptic. I'm not.
Absolutely. Yeah, we did not discuss this question, really. It's coming on the spot.
She said it once, and I'm like, hey, I'm going to ask her about that.
Yeah, I would say that, as I said, the trend from kind of batch to real time is real, right? No pun intended. And just like it starts off, with open source or new technologies, but it is mainstream today, right? And on Azure, we have absolutely mission critical services, Azure Stream Analytics, for example, or Azure Data Explorer, which are huge services. Azure ADE processes 160 petabytes of events every day, right? So when you think about Gwen's keynote earlier, and she talked about all of this data being generated, it needs to go in somewhere. And we started off at Microsoft using our own system, but the scale of these services is immense. And whether it's whether you can build it on your own, Pinot was created at LinkedIn, or whether you use a cloud service, there is no doubt that you will need a real-time analytics infrastructure for your data platform, whether you're serving out real-time customer needs, right? It's a customer-facing application, or even internally to the business where there is a need for near real-time data so that product managers, marketing, sales can make those calls on a daily basis based on the latest and greatest data.
Yeah, I imagine there's even in the tension between internal and external at the cloud hyperscale sort of Azure level, I imagine there's an interesting story about internal consumers of analytics. I mean, you're talking about every cloud needs to expose these as services that people can pay for and integrate. But I imagine on the inside, there's a story there too.
Absolutely. I mean, we dog food, just like everyone should. I highly recommend that.
Yes.
And there's no scale like, Teams using these products or, or some of these other massive services needing to store all their telemetry, logging information, all of this. And really, you can think of it as the tap has just opened and there's been an explosion. It's more a fire hose, which will keep coming in. And so it will never stop. So think about, as you're building out these architectures, think about not just the short term, but a little bit forward in terms of what are your requirements, right? And map those back to what platform you want to use, the scale, the latencies, all of these characteristics are very important, and it adds up, right? So think through this and make the right decision.
Yeah, absolutely. Sachin, now you and I did a meetup, or our teams collaborated on a meetup around a year ago, maybe early last summer, about your selection process. And you don't need to go through product names and everything unless you want to, but I'm interested in knowing, by the way, speaking of meetups, what follows is an absolutely shameless plug. May 10th, I'm going to be back in the city, Sachin and I, and DoorDash and StarTree, and we're going to be doing a meetup in the city. Details on social media, there's no slide for that. But anyway, shameless plug, meetup, I'll be back. But this year ago meetup, we're purely talking about history now, you talked about the selection process. What role, how does the bake-off, and in particular, I'm interested in what role community played in that?
Yeah, I mean, first of all, I think the meetups is, as you said, right, it was there's a first order effect of networking and connecting, and always is great. But there's a second order effect, which is the innovation factor and the the compound effect that it gets generated because we start exchanging stories of each other's. I think I had a meetup in 29, probably it was Kapil's meetup, which introduced in the LinkedIn, this was a LinkedIn meetup. And I happened to be there, and I was like, 2019, I was looking at it, and it was, wow, this is a different problem they are solving. And when we hit the problem, and we were looking at a similar problem, and we wanted to look at RTA.
The year before the pandemic.
Yeah.
You said, oh, this is cool. And then?
Then we hit the problem in 2020. And then we started looking, and that meetup definitely helped me to actually start looking at some of this, how we wanted to start with the journey. So that was one. And then when we started on this journey, there was a bootstrap. We were evaluating multiple databases. We were looking at ClickHouse, we were looking at Imply, and we were looking at Pinot. And during that initial bootstrap time, we were looking at community, and the community, Apache community, was very helpful in the first week. We were able to bootstrap, get the POC running, and able to see what are the benefits of Pinot during that time. So that was a immensely beneficial relationship with the Apache community that we had.
Excellent. That's good to hear.
Which leads me to believe all good ideas come when you attend conferences or while you're taking a shower. So yeah.
The shower thing is very, very real. And
meetups are good for generating ideas.
Yeah, and one more thing to add on to that is open source, right? Open source is a huge part of the community, whether it's open formats, which will increasingly become prevalent, and just open source Apache Linux Foundation. It plays a big role in the adoption and just creation of new tech.
Yeah, it's good to have
solving these new problems.
Essentially, this like universal free tier that developers can play with. You can have an early investment of time before there's an investment of money to make sure that the thing works the way you want it to. It's good to be able to have that. However that free tier shapes up. Maybe back to the building a new thing, and I guess I just want to get cool stories out of Kapil here. I don't know, but Dipti, you mentioned. You said something like, maybe you could build your own like LinkedIn did, or there are these services. Now, that's in Kishore's keynote yesterday. He said he never wanted to build a new database, and frankly, I think that's wise counsel. Like, if you think I should make a new database, like you're almost certainly wrong, right? That's not. I get it. I get where that comes from, but you probably don't want that. Yet you did. Now you talked about why, but so I don't need you to go over that again. But the having gone through that experience and at least seeing it at a supervisory level, reflect a little bit on the size of the task of building that new piece of infrastructure. Was Kishore's original insight that this is a bad idea, at least by default the right one?
Yep, absolutely. I think that's wise counsel, right? I think in most situations, if your first instinct is, hey, we need to go build a new database, like stop, right? Do not do that. 99.99% of the time, that is going to be the wrong answer. And in the 0.001%, or the time that it is right, I think, and even our experience, right, and Kishore, I think, was absolutely right in terms of, hey, we never wanted to build this in the first place. But I think that also gives you a sense of where the value truly lies. And even in other contexts, right? I think there's a very similar journey. When you say the first thing you start off with, hey, what can we just use and pay for, right? To get your product off the ground, because you don't even know whether the product itself is going to succeed, right? Right. For example, even LinkedIn, before we went ahead and built a lot of infrastructure, was running on Oracle databases, right? Today it sounds ludicrous, right, if you were to create a website at that scale to run on it. But on the plus side, it allows the app and the product to actually see if that works or not. And then you can come back and say, hey, what else can we do? Is there somebody who could just, like a managed service that you could pay for and get this product off the ground? And in most cases, and at most scale factors, that almost always going to be the right answer, right? You get to a point where it's like, okay, this is just not going to sustain, or it's either not going to work, or it's not going to be cost effective. Then you look at, and which we have done in other instances, right, when we, and many others adopted things like Hadoop, it didn't make sense to kind of rebuild your own. But at a scale, it made sense to invest teams in not just adopting, but contributing to open source, right? Mm-hmm. So that's the other path that you kind of get into. And only in, like, you go through all of these choices, and at the end, if there is literally nothing else that works, then probably in that 0.01% of the cases, building a new database might be the right answer. But yeah, I'd be surprised if that's the right answer for anyone.
In the case of other notable projects to have come out of LinkedIn, building a new event streaming platform. I mean, at LinkedIn's scale, there are certain things that you do, and the second, third, and fourth order effects are well known.
Exactly. I think, Kafka's story was also similar. Again, it's been recounted a lot, so I won't repeat it, but there were lots and lots of different queuing things that were tried to cobble together to make things work, and it just wouldn't. So the need was, I think, just staring you in the face.
So Sachin, then Sudhir, same question. You had the fortune of being able to adopt an open source thing that was there and basically worked. What else did you have to build along the way? Because it drops into an existing system. Systems get difficult at the integration points. What else did you have to build?
We had to build a stream joiner, like we had to build a data processor upfront of Pinot, which was a stream joiner, and it was a declarative data pipelines that we built around it to be able to ingest the data to Kafka and merge the streams and ingest the data to Kafka, and then again stream it to Pinot. That was one area that we had to build. On the consumption side, we have a custom dashboard framework, and which uses Apache Calcite. And Apache Calcite, there were some SQL syntaxes mismatches though, so we had to build a little bit of Apache Calcite part effectively. And then there were some partitioner specific changes, like we had a unique requirement on backfill, so we had to do partitioner effectively. And the last thing that we built was also Grafana plugin for Pinot. So that was another work that we had to do, and hopefully it will get open source soon for the community.
Excellent. I would love to see that open source. That would be great. And that's interesting that emerges, because a lot of the kind of the sensibility of real-time analytics, and if you listen to the stories being told, the feature, the thing that we're doing is powering application features, kind of fundamentally, right? That's what Gwen talked about, Kishore's examples yesterday. You have a database that serves things that show up, as I say, in the interaction layer. Sometimes you also just want to look at the wiggles, and so there's your Grafana connector. That does not go away in this whole new world. So, Sudhir, anything notable you had to build?
I guess the main point here is that you don't need to build things from the ground up anymore. The real-time ecosystem has matured quite a bit over the last 5 to 6 years. So we're standing on the shoulders of giants, literally. When I guess Pinot was started, or Kafka, et cetera, or similar offerings from Netflix, et cetera, there weren't many things available at the time at the scale that we all needed, which is why we had to build it. But now there's a fairly good ecosystem building out there. And the kind of things that you mentioned, things like the connector stuff. Yesterday, Mike Davis, he's sitting over there. I can still see him in the dark. From DoorDash, gave a talk about a decoder on how we can plug in with the Pinot ecosystem, et cetera. So these days, you really have to identify small little gaps here and there in the overall framework that you're building, and try to figure out how you can build something to address that gap. If you could contribute that back to the community, that's excellent, that's honest, that's awesome. But for the most part, the ecosystem is coming along and building, plugging many of these gaps.
There you go. Dipti, again, with your perspective as a cloud provider, I feel like you get to see how lots of different of your customers do and see things. So, okay, this is the Real-Time Analytics Summit. We're talking about real-time analytics. What has to be in place before that makes sense? What other architectural either pieces of infrastructure, sensibilities, what's the precondition?
Yeah, absolutely. It's funny, as you talk to data platform teams across the board, whether it's large Fortune 10 company or even a smaller scale company, there's some pieces of the puzzle that absolutely say the same. You start off with ingestion, right? You have some streaming pipeline that's needed, whether it's Kafka or Pulsar or any of the offerings that exist straight out of the box from the hyperscalers. And then you land that data either in a lake or a warehouse or a purpose-built system, like we've been talking about, depending on your different requirements, right? And then the consumption happens. So you either have a Power BI report or reporting, Grafana dashboards on top of it, or you have a customer-facing application. So this flow is pretty standard, and everyone has kind of a similar architecture diagram in the back, right? You pick those pieces depending on your requirements, depending on your organization, right, and your affinities that you might have. And for real-time analytics in particular, we've seen that the streaming bit of it usually gets picked ahead of time, where instead of it might go into both places, the data might land in the lake as well as a real-time analytics database, right? And so those are some of the pieces that exist, need to be figured out before you start using these real-time analytics databases to then figure out how do you consume this information, right? What sits on top of it? What are the applications of it? And then beyond that, it's really about how does the business leverage this information. That goes to actual business units where we see 200 or 500 data analysts that require to use some of this information. Or it could be, as we've talked about, customer-facing apps, a part of a very large application that requires this real-time data served up on the fly, right? And QPS becomes very important. So that's the entire stack. I think it's pretty well understood today, but people have to think wisely about the selection of each of these pieces, and move from the classic batch to a real-time architecture.
All right. So final question. You each have about a minute, 20 seconds each. So from Dipti on down to Kapil. What would you like the folks in the audience to know if they're embarking on building their first real-time analytics implementation or in the middle of it? What do you wish you knew that you back then that you could tell them?
I think you've heard from the folks here. There's a lot of lessons learned. First step is the exploration, right? Spend time in understanding your own requirements. It's really important. Everyone is a little different, and every team is a little different. So I would say, understand your business requirements really well. Map those to the set of projects, products you're evaluating. Keep the open source in mind. Look at the cloud offerings, because you get a certain level of SLA, et cetera, right, for different scales. And then the third thing is think forward. You would be surprised that once you start with one use case and say, let me just capture this log data, there's yet another and another. And so the use cases will start coming up, where once you have a solid architecture, it'll allow you to leverage that and get to more capabilities, so you can speed up your time to value, your time to market, whatever you're building, much faster. So those are the steps that I would recommend.
All right, lessons for folks starting out new. I was really paying good attention to Gwen's talk. Gwen, great talk. So here are a few lessons which I'm going to piggyback on, right? First, complexity is a killer. So first, real-time systems are complex. So first thing I would tell my younger self is make sure that the architecture is composable. Make sure you're building it with the right technologies that are replaceable, pluggable, et cetera. For example, I think when you said there's no one single database that rules them all. Yes, we don't need more of those, but there's no one single database that rules them all. It's all composable architecture, going back to the Unix philosophy, right? So you got to figure that one out. That's one. And I love a blog from David McKinley. It's called the boring technology. What it means is that every single component that you add into your system is going to increase the complexity of the system by quite a bit, right? So you want to be very careful. And developers usually are very happy folks that just, oh, I'm just going to add Redis and Elasticsearch I attended the LinkedIn talk. They were talking about Helm charts, so there you go. I'm just going to keep adding that stuff, right? Stop doing that, right? Look for simplicity. Second, lastly, real-time systems, pay real attention to it, as no pun intended. Is it really required? If it meant for human consumption, completely agree. No one makes decisions in 20 milliseconds or thereabouts, right? However, integration with machines, that's where it's at. Yesterday, there was a talk from Thomas about Quixo, I believe, crashes. Right? So if you know that you're in a car and you're driving down and you want to know if there's a crash, you want to get immediate attention, that is a real-time need. So and those kind of things cannot be done from a human perspective. You just need a machine integration, et cetera. So those are things. And lastly, I guess, trade-offs. Life is a trade-off. You have to make various trade-offs. In my case, back in the days, it just should you make life easy on the producer side, or should you make life easy on the consumer side? If you go with strict schema validation, you would be making life easy on the consumption side, but hell on the producing side. Velocity will reduce. Vice versa, if you have no schema requirements or no validation, super easy to produce billions and billions of events per day, et cetera, but super hard on the consuming backend side. So these are trade-offs that you want to make. So understand your use case, understand who you want to support for what use case, and make appropriate trade-offs.
Excellent. Sachin.
Yeah, I think first is I would say is a mindset change. When you are looking at the analytics, we are generally used to building pre-aggregates. You are using batch systems. And writing Flink jobs, we tend to do a lot of pre-aggregates. Then when you move to real-time analytical systems and the databases, one of the things that you have to do is unlearn that part and relearn, again, going back to the old database query optimization techniques, and how do you apply those into real-time analytics, right? So I think that's a unlearning and relearning part that I think would be an important part. Second thing is, when you're looking at the QPS specifically, I think, are you in tens of QPS or hundreds of QPS or thousands of QPS? That's a very important decision to make in terms of how you're going to scale your systems and what kind of databases you are going to use and what ease of management versus ease of querying that you are going to get, and how the low linear latency response you are going to get for the queries or the load that you are going to increase. So I think that's very important, and Pinot actually does very well in that. Third, I think I would write on again Glenn's talk about user experiences. The experience is very critical. You can use magic of data to build enchanting experiences. And that's, don't throw up the data just because you have it and you are getting a lot of data, just throw it to the user. The user experiences are critical, and real time, you need to make sure that those experiences matter a lot.
That is, that would tweet or post on LinkedIn. Build those experiences, insert actual service to users, not just because you can. Yeah. Kapil, wrap us up.
Yeah, just to wrap it up, I think the other panelists pretty much covered anything I had in mind. I think the things that I would really stress is, I think one point that Dipti made, really understand where you want your product to be, right? It's much more effective when you start with that view and then connect back into what are the technology pieces that you really need to enable that. And the complexity problem is real, right? So we suffered through that over a period of time and then got to a much better place. It's very easy to keep adding stuff into the ecosystem, and over time you just get like a connected spaghetti thing where it's very hard to untangle. So I think paying attention to that complexity, making sure that you're really looking at the ecosystem that you're trying to build and thinking about the pieces from a forward-facing sense, I think is critical to being successful with implementations.
Thank you. And if I could ask, round of applause for our panelists.